Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Stephen G. Hart. The best reward from teaching in Penn's Organizational Dynamics program is when one of our grad students achieves great success in their career. And Alison Dixon definitely fits this bill. Alison graduated from Organizational Dynamics in 2018 and has emerged as an influential and visionary HR business partner and leader. I was delighted to catch up with Alison and learn more about what she has been up to over the last couple of years. It turns out that the global pandemic occurred just as she was embarking on her career as an HR business partner, first with Comcast in Philadelphia, and more recently with Logic Monitor in Austin, Texas. Among the topics we discussed, Alison talks about what it was like to be at the forefront of implementing HR strategy during the pandemic. She also shares some of the great lessons she learned from her experience. I especially like how Alison is now thinking about what her company, and specifically HR, should do next in order to make it more sticky for their employees and hold onto them against the rising tide of the great resignation and the potential organizational and HR challenges associated with returning to the physical office. I really hope you enjoy listening to our conversation. Well, Alison, it is great to see you after so many years. Tell me where your career took you after you left Penn or you graduated with your master's degree. Where did you end up?
Yeah, so I ended up at Comcast actually and kind of networked my way into Comcast through the program because we had a lot of graduates that ended up working at Comcast, and some of the classes actually, in particular, organizational politics with John Eldred. He had us interview people to talk about organizational politics. I met with a couple Comcast people to interview them about organizational politics, and they were really kind of helpful in getting me into Comcast. So I started off in learning and development there and high potential talent development, and then went on to be an HR business partner for network services engineering. So I was at Comcast about 3.5 years. So really kind of as I graduated from the program in 2018, I had transitioned into Comcast and kind of left my previous work as a fundraiser.
Mm. You were doing some work, as I recall, at Comcast on the learning and development side. And you had a pretty interesting role and responsibility there. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you did without giving away any confidences?
Yes. So I started, and I think through the program, I really focused on leadership and how people think. And I sort of was thinking as I was in the program, I should have been like a sociologist or something, just because I was always interested in systems. And so when I got to Comcast, I got a role as a program manager and focusing on high potential talent. So when you think about somewhere like Comcast, you sort of pick the best and the brightest, and they're in these high potential programs. And I got the opportunity to redesign programs. So I worked on a program that was really for our frontline supervisors. And I was sort of tasked with redesigning it at one point. And what I did is, when you think about your frontline supervisors, frontline people, what they're doing is they're installing cable. So I thought to myself, like, to be able to speak to this group of people and to be able to really understand how they learn, how they think, what's important to them, I had to get into it. So I went on truck rolls. I learned how to kind of install cable. And I sat in a call center. I shadowed people just making calls. I learned about kind of the pain points, and really what that job was like and what it took to go from kind of that frontline person making calls to coaching people to make calls, and to sort of, deal with dissatisfied customers, that kind of thing. So that's when it was such a cool job and kind of spoke to that sociologist in me of just like, how does this work?
I love that you did that. I mean, that's going above and beyond a reasonable pale, I think, of anybody to get it. How did that enhance your ability to be a leader, a guide, a coach, a trainer in that role?
Yeah, I think through actually the program, I remember specifically being in Derek Newberry's class. It was, I actually wrote it down, org culture and change. And, I remember we did a tour of GlaxoSmithKline, who was doing kind of the change from offices to open concept. And this person that was sort of in charge of that change and all of the things they did to bring people along, and just sort of made me realize the little things that really go into somebody's day-to-day work. And when we think about work, people spend 90,000 hours of their lives at work. It's, a huge portion of their day, their life, their, time away from their family, and little things really matter. And so I think like it really, through the program, especially, it really changed my thinking of just like, especially in HR, you have to be so connected to what people do every single day. And I think if you stay disconnected, you'll never really be able to speak to the right group of people. So in the way that they want to be spoken to, and it won't resonate. So as an example, at Logic Monitor, as I started supporting go-to-market, I kind of set out on a charter of like, I'm going to know the business as well as the person that I support. Like, I want to be that true thought partner, and I want to be able to give insights that they can't see from their level. I think you have the ability as an HR business partner, and in HR, to sort of be able to look at an organization, connect with employees, and reflect that back to the leader, and be able to speak to them in the way that they want to be spoken to, because you know that business like they do. And that's really how you build that credibility. So I think that from that like experience in building that program, where I literally, shadowed call center agents, where I was learning how to install cable, I really saw how like, wow, I created a program that really, really resonated. And, I don't think I could have done that otherwise. It wouldn't have connected.
Yeah, and I think you built the credibility not only of yourself as a rising leader in the organization, but also for the function of HR, right? The idea that here's somebody from HR, which is not necessarily known for folks coming out of a business line, who really kind of understands us and knows what it takes to put this work together.
Yeah. And it's funny because even now I join, forecast calls for sales. And I have sales reps say to me sometimes, like, he's like, most surprises, or they say to me, like, most surprised to see you on those calls. And it's like, I've got to know the business as well as a leader I support does. And so that kind of has gone across the board, because as I started at Logic Monitor, I just supported sales. And now I'm supporting the entire business. I support the executive leadership team. So it's been more of a challenge to kind of be able to jump in the way that I have in the past, but it's given me the opportunity to sort of know the business across and be able to make the connections between product and marketing, and, and then in sales as well.
Great advice for anybody with an aspiring HR career is really know your business. Yeah.
Exactly. Like that's been my secret. I really feel like, because I didn't come up through HR in the normal way where, I couldn't fall back on a generalist experience. Like there's still things that are huge gaps in my kind of HR resume. But in terms of being a strategic HR person, I can sort of outsource that work, and I can just completely focus on the strategy. And sort of where I have seen people struggle in HR is making that transition from tactical to strategic, because I think that is where HR business partnering is. And I think, I think before, HR business partnering was very tactical. And when I was at Comcast, we really made the transition to strategic HR. And you could see some people struggling when they had just relied on the tactical for most of their career.
Yeah, it's sort of almost a requirement these days, I think,
That's
for
right.
HR business partners to really be invested in the business and know it intimately.
That's right.
So you took that same thinking, you went to Logic Monitor, which I believe is in Austin,
That's
Texas.
right. Yep.
So tell us about that transition from Comcast to Logic Monitor in Austin.
Yeah. So Comcast, I felt like I got the playbook on how to do it really well. I got such great business partner experience. I learned so much about engineers and engineering, and supporting, those kinds of leaders and what that's like. But I felt at Comcast kind of it's so established, it's so big. It's you sort of do a year of it, and it's similar following through. Like they're not going to really change everything in terms of their talent process. Like the number of employees will remain about the same. So I wanted to experience something a lot different. And so I wanted to experience a little bit more of a startup environment. So at Logic Monitor, when I joined, we were a couple hundred employees, and now we're well over 1,000. So we've doubled in size in terms of number of employees since I've been there. And I have to say, like, it's a different company than it was when I joined, and sort of how do you, especially in the pandemic, I should probably mention I transitioned during the pandemic, how do you keep or foster a culture, grow a culture when you are just adding new employees constantly? We've increased, again, double in a year in a pandemic. So that's been incredibly challenging, and it's just different all the time. So when I think about contrasting Comcast to Logic Monitor, it's just the pace of change is just incredible.
Let's talk a little bit then about the pandemic, because as you said, you moved there as this was emerging, and I know we've all learned some deep
Mhm.
lessons from pandemic. But I look at the pandemic as being it's HR's moment
That's right.
in our organizations. This was the time for HR to step forward as a function in a business and be able to craft a strategy and have a way of helping employees weather the storm that the pandemic brought upon them. And so
Yep.
tell me a little bit about what you have done at Logic Monitor. And I think you've also done some writing about this in some of the articles I've read that you've written that have appeared on LinkedIn. And I love the way in which you're giving advice to people, both about their career, the impact of how things have changed as a result of the pandemic. So let's just do a postmortem, if you will, of the last couple
Yeah.
of years of your career in this role and what you've learned from it.
I think when the pandemic started, I was at Comcast, we were working from home. Everybody was, I just remembered just so much uncertainty. We didn't know what was going to happen. I was kind of putting together presentations and talking to employees about just like, nobody thinks this is easy. We're all struggling. And I really tried to just like be vulnerable myself and share what I was experiencing. And I had employees come to me and just be like, I needed to hear that today because I have kids at home. I don't know what's going to happen next. So there was just like a part of it that was so upsetting initially. And we were all just sort of like in survival mode. And I remember Philadelphia, we couldn't get people into the office. And just from a tactical perspective, I actually really had to transition to tactical because it was like, we literally need to get somebody into the office, and Philadelphia is not allowing people to be on the street. It was like that phase of the pandemic. So I really had to kind of shift between how do I be a vulnerable person that can connect with people and kind of talk about these higher level concepts, but also then tactically, how do I get somebody into an office and what does that look like? And what are what if somebody gets COVID going into the office? Like what are the implications? So there was everything in my role focused on the pandemic when I was at Comcast. Cut to, I moved to Austin in October 2020. And, it was still pretty significant, but obviously was sort of lesser restrictions in Texas, but everybody was home still. And I started to really think about how I was at Comcast for a long time. I had a lot of relationships. I adored my boss. I had, and it was alarmingly easy for me to leave. And I started to think about that, how you don't do the 2 weeks anymore in the office. It's, there's not that, you don't have to say goodbye to somebody in person. It's really just like closing one laptop, moving, opening a new laptop, starting a new career. And so I am in no way shocked at the number of kind of the great resignation happening right now, because it's super easy to leave and companies are not as sticky. And so I've been really thinking about a lot about like, how do you make a company sticky when people are not together? They don't necessarily have a best friend at work. There's no kind of like end to your day. The lines are all blurred, and you can kind of become resentful of your job, because I think we're all a little bit addicted to sort of opening messages, the Slacks of the world. They sort of have the same kind of like addiction that an Instagram does. So I've been thinking a lot about how do you make this experience in the employee life cycle sticky. So I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about the fact that I think a lot of us in the pandemic have just decided like what's important to us, what we want to do with our lives, making career transitions. So even conversely, like maybe the 9 to 5, I think it's dead. And I think the companies that are going to succeed are going to figure out a different way of working. And how do you get the most out of people? How do you grow them? How do you protect their time? And how do you make the company sticky and one they want to stay at when they don't have all of the things that we've always known were sticky, which is friendships, relationships, collaboration, it being awkward to leave and do the 2 weeks. Like that really was a kind of hindrance to walking away. So thought a lot about that, wrote some concepts on it. And I've been thinking even more about non-traditional candidates lately. I wrote an article about that where I think a lot of us at this point, we're bringing so many unique experiences to the workplace. And I'm fond of saying, if it's not rocket science, it's not rocket science. And most of us can kind of learn other things and do other things. And maybe as companies, we're shorting ourselves, we're shorting employees by not thinking of meaningful ways for them to really like get different experiences in our organizations. If the 9 to 5 is dead, maybe the kind of concept of a traditional, this is my role, is dead as well. And how do we think about that differently? And how do we make, and in at the same time, make the company sticky?
One of the things I've looked at is thinking about the Great Resignation being driven a little bit by what I would call the Great Reprioritization.
Mm-hmm.
Employees are finding that their world of work was not as meaningful to them they've discovered.
Right.
And what I love about what you've been writing about and the way you're talking about your experiences, you're trying to find a way for you and your other leaders in your organization to reprioritize the way they are leading as a result of the pandemic. Is that an accurate understanding of the journey you're on?
It certainly is. And I think leading has never been more challenging. I think that it takes an incredible amount of vulnerability and empathy. I think that the leaders that are sort of saying, we want to go back to the office, we got to get people back into the office. If you think about like the cost of parking, inflation, my rent in Austin went up $800 a month. So, I mean, people have real world problems right now. And I think that they also have the leverage. We have a talent shortage. It's the Great Resignation. We know what it costs to replace that talent that turns over is incredibly high. When we think about, talent acquisition time, HR's time, the onboarding time. So I think companies are realizing, wow, we really need to keep people. So I think leaders are in a really unique position where if they get this right, they can kind of create something and an experience that employees really want to connect with and stay with. But if we do this sort of like, COVID's over, let's go back to the way it was, that's going to be met with like, I'm quitting for sure. Like for sure, you have to think about it differently. Like this genie is not going back in the bottle. So I definitely have thought about that and how, as a business partner, a leader has a totally different life and compensation, different, just very different from maybe some of the entry-level employees. And how do we reflect back, like, this message is not going to work. You're speaking to a different age group, a different pay grade, like everything is different now. And you have to modify your message and the way you connect, because if you just think you're going to go back to the way it was before the pandemic, you're sadly mistaken and you're going to lose a lot of your people.
Can you give us some specifics of some things you've either thought about or you plan to implement at your organization where it's a reflection of this understanding from a leadership perspective?
I think for me, it's really been, I know my company is really thinking differently about, how we work. I think we're sort of looking at, we want to have places where people can gather, but sort of the idea of like, you're coming in is off the table. And I think that when we think about leadership and sort of the different styles, like the directive, I want you to do this, you're going to come in, this is required. Like that just doesn't fly anymore. It has to be invitational. So when we think about some of the things we're doing, we're thinking about like, how do you invite people in to a place that they really want to go to so that they can kind of get some of the things that we know are going to always be sticky. A best friend at work is always going to be sticky. Somebody to mentor you, access to, executives, all that stuff is always going to kind of be appealing. But if it's directive, people are done. Everybody has now prioritized themselves, their families. They have a rhythm to their day. I'm used to getting up, working out, meditating, all those things. Like I'm not giving those things up. And I don't think anybody else wants to either. So it's more about, again, I just don't think the directive sort of authoritative style of leadership works anymore. It's got to be empathy, vulnerability, and connecting with people where they are. And so that's like a lot of the coaching that I'm giving to the leaders that I support.
That's really good. Empathy and particularly the empathy piece of it, right? It's something that's so sadly missing from lots of our organizations. Now, one of the things that you've written about is you've talked about how this has never been perhaps a better marketplace for employees in terms of their job. And you've also written a wonderful article, which I loved, called "You Are the Boss of Your Own Career." And so I thought that was really, that's fairly new thinking these days. You usually think that organizations own you, lock, stock, and barrel.
Yep.
But in reality, there's a lot of flexibility, and particularly in this time, right? So what conclusions have you come to about how does somebody be the boss of their own career? What are some of the advice that you're giving?
I think, and when we think about an organization, and we think it provides so much for us, even some things that, if we think about like our health benefits are, like it's a lot of our lives. It's a lot of everything. And when we think about even the leadership of the past, it being more sort of, I would say directive, right? Like, I think we came from a place where, you're the person that you report to is like, we're coming in Tuesday, you're going in Tuesday. Like there's just more of like we just responded differently to that kind of leadership before. Like we did it. And I think that, if I lived in Philadelphia, my kind of career options were in Philadelphia. And so that was limiting. So it's never been better because you can, you open your laptop and you can work anywhere. And even I've just read recently that how much people are doing just side hustles and putting together side hustles and then just getting their benefits elsewhere. And so you can either, as a leader, sort of push back on that or accept it and think about like, how can we make this work in our organization? How can we give people gigs? How can we give people experiences that they can't get elsewhere? Like maybe I want to get into sales enablement. I don't know. How can my company offer that for me and keep me longer? Because maybe I don't want to be an HR business partner forever. I don't know. Like I think that companies can kind of offer that like robust experience to people. But in terms of owning your own career, I really felt when I was at Comcast, people would just sort of be in roles and their lives would be kind of passing them by. They're doing the 9 to 5, like not really thinking about it, not really sure if they're happy. And I kind of got on this crusade of like, you're spending so much time here, you should love it. And if you're waiting for the company or you're waiting for your boss to tell you what's next for you, you're going to be waiting a long time. So I really encourage people to think about their career as like, or a job that they're in as like a beginning, a middle, and an end. There should be an end. By the end of this job, what will you have done? What will you have learned? And then what's next? If you're kind of just like in a job and you don't know how long it's going to go, you're just going to kind of get into this rhythm where you're just like, it gets easy, you're not learning. And to put yourself in the driver's seat, because I just don't think that many people really do, you really set yourself apart just by having those conversations and networking. When I think about myself, like I transitioned relatively easy into HR, and it was just because I was talking about my career in that way and talking about wanting to learn and grow and being hungry and curious. I think if you're just sort of looking down, working day after day and don't have that beginning, middle, and end in mind, you're like, this is your life. And I think that sort of rigor and passion I have around like every day that you're working is a day of your life, and sort of the idea of YOLO, right? So if you're spending all of your time or most of your life at work, and this idea it should matter, the idea that you own this, just put yourself in the driver's seat. I think it just gives you the feeling like, wow, I have to do something. I have to have those conversations. You're kind of willing to put yourself out there a little bit more. And I think for me, that's really what's made the difference where I was able to transition because a lot of other people are not doing that. They're just sort of hoping that their company tells them what's next for them.
Yeah, I think a lot of us go through our work lives sort of away from the opportunities like that, not really thinking about what's next or what's around the corner that I'm not paying attention to. And we get, I was encouraging people in my role in my old job to think of your career less about being a ladder and more about it being like a rock wall. A rock wall is
I said that all the time. Yes. I
number.
actually have it like on a deck, a slide that
Yeah,
like your career is not a ladder, it's a rock climbing wall, the different experiences you can get.
yeah.
But I mean, as company, like I haven't really seen, and I really want to see a company do this well. If we're going to really say that your career is a rock climbing wall, how do we make sure that employees are not rock climbing out of our organizations, especially our high potential people? And how do we sort of create an opportunity where they can learn on the job, which is how we know people learn like the best and the most. So I want to see that done well. I haven't seen it done really, really well. But again, I think that in this new talent environment, and this is kind of where I think HR had a moment for sure in the pandemic, got the seat at the table. But to keep the seat at the table in the long term, the organizations that are going to succeed are the ones that figure this out, that figure out how to create these experiences, that embrace the side hustles and embrace, the idea that you can go do something else for a while. I'm hearing all the time now sabbaticals. Maybe take a sabbatical. Take a sabbatical. You're going to study something different. You're going to work in another part of the organization. So until we start thinking differently like this, I think we're going to continue to see more people resigning and more turnover at companies.
Yeah, another area where another touch point, I should say, and you've written about this in one of your articles, that creates this experience for people, and this gives them the motivation and the encouragement to think differently about what they're doing, is the area of performance management.
Yeah.
And I read an article that you'd written about that too. And what's your thinking on how we have to evolve that practice to be more open and consistent, and the ability to drive people to take risk and reach out in their careers?
Yeah, I think the idea of kind of the traditional performance management is dead. I think that you really, as a leader, as a leader myself now, I really try to know my people inside and out, know what their motivations are, know how they think, and create a space. And this goes again, vulnerability sets you free of like, let me tell you about a time I screwed up. Like, let me tell you about all the things that I don't know. I'm very fond of talking about, like, don't ask me math questions, like all of the sort of things that make me, I'm not perfect in any way, shape, or form, and neither are you. And like, go and try stuff. And if you fail, I have your back. And so I think if we have people kind of in this, and I don't know if we need to call it something different, like people want performance feedback. I want performance feedback. I want to know how I'm doing. I want my boss to be telling me, here's where I think you're doing great. Like I'm in a new role now, right? So I think that we want that feedback. But if it's sort of that rigid idea of like, exceeds expectations, checkbox, like it's just, that's not meaningful. So I think the idea of kind of on the job, on the go, if we think about the way we learn, the way we consume information, I try to just do it consistently. So you're never surprised, like, and there's never you know, you screwed this up and now you're in trouble. Like that's, it's just not, we're all adults. We're all, I think, trying our best, and we have to create space where people can fail and try new things. And I think the idea of like exceeds expectations at the end of the year, checkbox is over. It's the ongoing continuous feedback that I think is most meaningful.
Yeah, and it's going to require a shift in culture, right? A mindset. in culture. And it sounds
That's
like
right.
you landed at an organization where you're very influential in creating that culture there. So what some advice might you give to an aspiring HR leader to influence their culture for change around HR issues like this?
I think the thing that I have really felt like has helped me be successful in HR again is I think you have to really know your people, your business. If you're coming at everything from just an HR lens, if you're trying to implement things that you've seen in another company, that you did in your last job, and you sort of have one playbook that is your HR playbook, and you're just going to like, that's what you're going to do, it's not going to work. And so for me, and I think this is really actually what my master's program did for me, I approach everything as like brand new. And I focus a lot on, like, if I think about like design thinking and the empathy interviews and understanding where people are coming from. Every organization is at a different spot in its culture and its life cycle. So stuff that I did in Comcast does not work at Logic Monitor. It's entirely different. So I think that, being really responsive to the moment that we're in is most important, and approaching things like a sociologist and approaching things really curious. So for me at Logic Monitor, it's really been, we've had so much change. Our demographics are different than they were at Comcast. We have people all over the world. So we're not going to implement something necessarily in Austin that's going to work in Singapore, right? So it's being responsive to kind of the overall culture that you want to build, but also the micro cultures that exist, and being flexible and agile to all the differences. And again, I think it's the thing that I have found that's made me successful in HR, and I think will make other people successful in HR, is being responsive to the moment that you're in. If you're trying to force fit something, if you're trying to bring something that was pre-COVID or pre-whatever, you really have to be an in the moment problem solver, and listener.
Mm. You talked a little bit about what your master's program at Penn gave to you. Tell us a little bit more about some of the other influences that you've carried forward that have been meaningful and impactful in your career.
So I think when I think about the master's program at Penn, like every class I took away something that I think I've carried forward. I think, I remember your class and human capital, and thinking about, how HR for a long time didn't really have a seat at the table, and human capital and the management of that capital and the people that are actually doing the work every day. Not only is it a huge expense, it's the biggest expense often to the business. And a lot of times, like, we don't think about it that intentionally. We don't put enough resources behind it. And then when I think about, again, Derek Newberry's class on culture and change, and just thinking about these little things that really make all the difference, and how, when we think about going from, again, like an offices to an open concept, and the micro changes that people experience and how that impacts their whole day and lives, like extrapolate that, I feel like my master's program not only gave me incredible connections and allowed me to kind of network my way into HR for sure, but I believe it taught me how to think. It taught me how to listen. It taught me to be vulnerable, and sort of acknowledge, like, I don't know everything. I'm not coming in as an expert here. I'm here to pull information from all of you, and let's design something together that really is responsive to this organization. So I think, that to me, I think I was more rigid before Comcast, or I mean, before my master's program. And I think I thought, like, this is how things work. And I feel like subsequently I have just I question everything constantly now. And I attribute that to Penn.
Good. Critical thinking and liberating your
Right.
spirit, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I wonder what's next for you in terms of your the next 5, 10 years of your career. What are you looking forward to, and what do you think the future holds of work?
So we just got a new people leader at our company. And she has sort of been really interesting background, where she's been a CRO before, and she's been in HR, and she's been all over different companies and businesses and in different parts of the business. And I'm really excited to learn from her, because I think that for me, I'm really interested in HR having that seat at the table, which I believe I do. And how, in this moment where we are sort of getting beyond COVID, and I am seeing companies now say, like, you're going to be going back to like, I see companies doing the thing that I think they shouldn't do. I'm excited to be at the company I'm at and have the opportunity to really redesign what work can be. Like, I, over the next few years, want to create and be a part of a company that is thinking about the stickiness, the new stickiness. What is it? How do we create that rock climbing wall opportunity? Because in theory, it's a great idea. I don't believe we facilitate it super well. To be part of how we think about performance. The normal performance reviews are dead. Like, what comes in place? How do you institutionalize or create the culture around continuous feedback? I think we talk about it. I haven't seen it done super well. So how do you create that and create a culture around that? Because I think that those are the companies that are going to win. So for me, I'm really, in the next few years, interested in that and creating something that I think is best in class and sort of sets my company apart. And beyond that, of course, I think I found my sort of thing, I think, in HR business partnering. Not to say I wouldn't want to go maybe back to learning and development or something like that, but I do see myself kind of continuing on this HR business partner path and, learning more.
Well, I love that you're so optimistic about the future of and the world of work, and that you want to be an agent of change in creating it. That's really a wonderful attitude to have. And as an HR guy myself, I thank you for that energy and effort. I think it's critically important that HR leaders have these clarity of purpose of what the future will look like and how they can influence it. So,
We've never
congratulations.
been in a position where we're designing something. I mean, what a cool opportunity where, it's like, it just feels like such a cop out to just say, like, COVID's over, let's do what we did before, and it's lazy.
Well,
So
that's the danger of slipping back to what we used to do before and not realizing that
it didn't
many
work.
things have changed. Yeah,
It
yeah,
didn't work. I think it was broken before, and we really realized how broken it was. And, I think to sort of, I just am disappointed to see sort of like let's just go back to the
yeah.
way it was. So I think it's such a cool time to be in HR for that reason of, like, you get to design something really cool. You have a seat at the table. I think we have resources now that we didn't have before, because people do realize how important HR is. So, like, just the opportunity to create something incredible. I can't believe that I sort of hit this time in my career where it's like, I feel like I do have a voice in the room. I've been in it long enough, and I can design something new and interesting.
Good. Well, again, thanks for that uh, clarity of purpose around the HR. I think it's really good. We're going to learn a little bit about you, though, now.
Yeah, sure.
I usually finish each of these podcasts with a couple of questions I ask my guests to give us a little bit of look behind who you are as a person. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. You have not seen these in advance, so just respond.
Not
What is one thing you would most like to do in your life that you have not yet done?
one thing I like to do. So I am training for a marathon right now. I'm going to run this marathon in May. I have found for me that pushing my body and having sort of a thing that I'm focused on, whether it's running or, building myself in that way, kind of positively impacts the rest of my life. So I ultimately do want to do sort of an Ironman. So that's one thing, kind of sneak behind the curtain. One thing I do want to do in my life that I haven't done yet.
Wow, you're into punishment, it seems. In your opinion, what is one thing that the world needs right now?
Empathy.
Mm.
I think that between sort of the political tribalism and, everybody's different perspectives sort of meeting. When I think about work, even when we think about politics, when we think about COVID, when we think about different generations that have never sort of, you think about like the boomers who are still at work, and then you've got Gen Z, which is totally different. And I just don't think we've ever sort of been in a place where everybody's so openly themselves and is, I think that we're talking about mental health more. We're talking about all these things more. And I think that this is a great thing, but it has to be met with empathy, or I think we'll see more of the divisions that we've seen today. So my sort of what I do and what I try to do is really try to understand everyone's perspectives. So from kind of like the boomer population who may be saying one thing to my sort of the Gen Z that are entering the workforce, it's and me sort of sitting in the middle as in, I guess I'm an old millennial now. And I think about, I graduated in 2008 and I look at people who graduate now and I'm so jealous, the opportunities that they're walking into. But again, we're all coming from kind of unique experiences and baggage and all of that stuff. And so I think if we can sort of approach conversations and interactions with empathy and non-judgment, I think is what we need the most.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement. Yeah. You've already hinted a little bit at my next question, but let's just see where it takes us. If you were back at school today thinking about starting a career, what would you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah. I mean, it probably, again, I did sort of say a sociologist, something like that. I think about like a Brene Brown, right? So she's just like researching emotions and feelings and shame. And I'm just really always curious with the way things work and how people operate, and the systems and processes we put in place around that. I've always just been super curious about people and organization. So I probably would find myself sociologist, researcher, something like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you've always had that passion for understanding the human condition in lots of its
Right.
situations, right? So this might also fit with that. So I'm going to ask you to pick, when you answer this question, I'll ask you not to pick running. Uh, so what hobby or activity outside of your work brings you joy?
I golf
Oh,
a ton. I don't golf well. I like cannot break 100. So I golf, and I'm a kind of huge reader. So I have Audible, and I think what brings me joy is sort of listening, learning. I, just read the book Think Again by Adam Grant. Like I'm always trying to challenge my own perspectives. So those two things, I think golf and reading are my things that kind of light me up.
good. And my last question, what person, living or dead, has inspired you the most?
It's a great question. I think my mom has
Tell us
inspired
about
me the
mom.
most.
Tell us about mom.
So she, my parents were divorced. My mom worked as a probation officer, and she just had always put me first, and I think has always wanted the best for me, and was always super an advocate of my education. And I don't think anybody was more proud than when I graduated from Penn than my mom. So I think today, I think what she inspires me to sort of do more, continue, I think about the sacrifices she made for me. It just inspires me to do more and want to do more and kind of reach the highest levels of my career. I think there's always some level of we want to make our parents proud. So I think she inspires me the most.
Great. Well, what a wonderful tribute to your mom. That's great. Well, Alison, it's been terrific catching up with you. I will say that we at Penn are very proud of what you've done and what you've
Thank
done
you.
with your career and where you're headed. And so glad that you were part of our Penn community and thrilled to see you making such wonderful impact in your career and your work. Continue the great work and please stay in touch with us and touch with the Penn community as you go forward. Thanks so much for today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.